Marco Santini was 37 when he left Bari that spring. He wasn't meant for the sea. His hands were those of a mechanic, stained with oil, strong from years of tightening bolts and coaxing stubborn engines back to life. But factories had closed, the construction sites had gone silent, and men like him, honest, hard-working, had been left with nothing but promises of pay that never came. When the trawler Aurora offered him a spot, he took it without hesitation. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't steady, but it was something. His wife had cried the night before he left. Not loudly, not theatrically. Hers were the quiet tears of someone tired of being strong. "Just don't stay too long, Marco," she whispered. "Lucia needs you." Their daughter was 12, shy, and tried her best to smile with the awkward braces on her teeth. She had slipped a folded note into his jacket before they parted. "Come back safe, Papa." He read it once on the pier, kissed her forehead, and tucked it into a waterproof pouch he carried on jobs. A talisman, a reason to return. The Aurora smelled of salt, diesel, and old wood. The captain was a lean man with skin like leather. His crew a mix of veterans and drifters who spoke in half-jokes and curses. Marco kept mostly to himself, working below deck, tending the engines, fixing what broke. He wasn't afraid of labor. He feared idleness more. Nights, when his shift was over, he'd climb to the deck and stare out at the horizon, wondering if his daughter was asleep, if his wife was reading by lamplight. The sea had a way of lulling men into trust. It was calm blue, endless, but Marco knew from the way the captain studied the clouds that a storm was coming. The storm came without ceremony, as if the sky had decided in an instant to open its fury. Marco was in the engine room when the first shutter rattled through the Aurora's frame. At first, he thought it was a mechanical fault, a misfiring piston. But then the sound came, a grinding groan that seemed to split the world in half. He rushed to the ladder, climbed, and burst onto the deck into chaos. The wind had teeth. It tore at the sails and ropes, howled through the masts, and snapped canvas like whips. Waves rose taller than houses, crashing against the hull with the violence of battering rams. Men clung to anything solid, shouting orders, prayers, curses, none of it audible over the roar. The captain's face was pale beneath his salt-scarred skin. He pointed toward the horizon, but Marco couldn't make out a word. Lightning split the sky, white fire tearing through black clouds. For a heartbeat, Marco saw the sea lit up like glass, peaks and valleys rolling like an unending mountain range. Then the darkness swallowed it all again. The Aurora tilted, shrieked, and the deck pitched beneath his feet. Marco clutched at the railing, but the wood was slick, his hands torn away by the sea's brute strength. The bow plunged into a trough, and when it rose again, half the deck was gone, washed clean of nets, crates, and men. Someone screamed his name, or maybe it was no one at all. Then came the crack. It was not the sound of wood breaking. It was the death cry of a ship. The hull split, water poured in, and Marco was thrown forward into the freezing dark. The cold hit him like a hammer to the chest. Salt water filled his mouth, his nose, his ears. He clawed upward, desperate for air, desperate for life. When he broke the surface, the Aurora was gone. The storm had claimed her, dragging her into the abyss. He shouted, but there were no voices, no lights, only the endless fury of the ocean. When dawn came, the storm had moved on, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt cruel. The ocean stretched in every direction, calm now, as though mocking the chaos of the night before. Marco's arms ached, his chest burned with every breath. But he was alive, clinging to a piece of timber that had once been part of the Aurora's deck. Debris floated nearby, scattered like bones across the water. He kicked weakly, guiding himself toward the nearest fragments. A half-crushed crate bobbed along, and inside it, by some grace, a handful of oranges remained. He seized them, pressing them to his chest like holy relics. A torn length of fishing net tangled around his ankle, which he gathered too, knowing instinctively that anything might matter. For hours he worked, dragging the pieces together, binding them with the net until he had something resembling a raft. It was crude, unstable, but it kept him above the water. He tied himself to it with strips of canvas torn from a sail, unwilling to risk drifting away in his sleep. The sun rose higher, beating down on his bare head. Marco shielded his eyes and scanned the horizon. Nothing. No mast, no smoke, no sign of land. Just an endless, merciless blue. Hunger clawed at him almost immediately, though he forced himself to ration the oranges. He ate only half of one, juice running down his chin, his stomach aching for more. Thirst was worse. Salt water tempted him with every wave, but he knew it would kill him faster than hunger. He prayed for rain, for clouds, for anything. That first night, wrapped in damp canvas on the trembling raft, he stared up at the stars. He thought of Lucia's note, still in his pouch, pressed against his chest. "Come back safe, Papa." He whispered it like a vow into the darkness. The days stretched into each other, blurring until Marco could no longer tell where one ended and the next began. The sun punished him by day, stripping his skin until it peeled raw. At night, the cold seeped into his bones, making him shiver so hard the raft shook beneath him. His lips cracked, his tongue swelled, and every drop of rain felt like salvation. He held the canister to the sky whenever clouds passed, whispering thanks for every mouthful collected. The oranges dwindled. He ate them slowly, fighting the instinct to devour them all in one sitting. By the seventh day, there were none left. Hunger became a gnawing beast inside him. He tried lowering the net into the water, hoping to catch fish, but the holes were too wide. They darted in and out, mocking his desperation. He fashioned a crude spear from splintered wood and, after endless attempts, managed to stab a small silver fish. He tore into it raw, the taste sharp and metallic, but it filled his stomach enough to buy him another day. Loneliness pressed harder than hunger. He had nobody to talk to but the sea. Sometimes he cursed it, spitting into the waves, demanding it take him quickly. Other times he begged it for mercy, as though it were a god itself. Sleep brought no relief. Nightmares of drowning woke him gasping, clutching the raft as if it were the body of a friend. And then came the visions. Once, he swore he saw the outline of land in the distance, a dark shape against the horizon. He paddled furiously, only to find it dissolve into nothing but waves. Another time, he heard his daughter's laugh carried across the water, so clear and bright it made his heart seize. He cried out her name, only to be answered by silence. The sea was empty, but his mind was full of ghosts. By the second week, Marco no longer knew how many days had passed. The sun rose and fell, the stars wheeled overhead, but time meant nothing. His body was shrinking, ribs showing through burnt skin, muscles trembling with the simplest movements. Even lifting his head to scan the horizon felt like dragging a stone uphill. He began to rage. At the sea, at himself, at God. His voice cracked as he shouted into the sky, demanding to know why he had been left alive when the others had not. He pounded his fist against the wood until his knuckles bled, then slumped, sobbing so hard the raft rocked. Yet when the fury burned out, what remained was silence, inside him as much as around him. That was when the prayers began. Not the neat, polished prayers he had learned as a boy in church, but the broken ones of a man who had nothing left but desperation. He begged aloud, his voice hoarse, for his wife not to be widowed, for his daughter not to grow up fatherless. "Please, Madonna," he whispered, staring at the endless water. "Don't let me vanish. Don't let my little girl wait for a door that never opens." He clutched Lucia's note against his chest every night, the ink long since blurred into smudges. Still, he pretended he could read it. The memory of her handwriting became a lifeline. His mind wandered between hope and madness. He thought of food constantly, bread, pasta, roasted meat. He saw visions of tables covered in meals, of his wife smiling across from him. But when he blinked, it was only the sea again. And yet, even at his weakest, something inside refused to surrender. Each time he thought, "This is it," some stubborn ember flared. Some whisper said, "Hold on." It was on a night when the sea lay flat as glass that the miracle came. Marco lay on his back, eyes half shut, too weak even to curse anymore. The stars above blurred, and the moon carved a silver path across the water. He had stopped eating, stopped trying to fish, convinced he was drifting toward death. He thought of Lucia, imagined her voice one last time, and whispered, "Forgive me." Then he saw her. At first, He thought it was another trick of his starving mind, just another phantom born of exhaustion. But the figure did not fade. She glided across the water, as though the waves themselves bent to carry her. She wore white, with a mantle of deep blue that seemed woven from the very sky. Her veil moved though there was no wind. Her face was gentle, sorrowful, yet filled with a light that hurt his eyes and soothed his soul all at once. Marco blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, but she remained. His breath caught in his throat. He tried to speak, but his voice broke into dry gasps. And yet, without words, he heard her, not in his ears, but in his chest, in the marrow of his bones. Do not fear. Warmth spread through him, easing the ache in his body, steadying his frantic heart. He pressed his forehead against the wood of the raft, tears spilling freely. "Madonna," he croaked, "don't leave me." The figure lifted her hand as if in blessing. The stars above seemed to brighten, and the air itself felt alive. Then, slowly, she faded, not vanishing but dissolving into the horizon, leaving behind a quiet unlike any Marco had ever known. When he raised his head again, gulls circled above, their cries sharp and real. And far in the distance, a mast rose against the sky. At first, Marco thought the mast was another mirage, like the false islands and phantom ships he had seen before. But the gulls didn't vanish. Their wings beat against the dawn sky, dipping and wheeling as they followed the invisible path that always led to land or men. Marco's heart hammered, a burst of strength rushing through his starved body. He dragged himself upright on the raft, gripping the timber until his hands bled anew. The shape on the horizon grew taller, clearer, a freighter, rusty and slow, its hull streaked with orange and brown. Smoke curled faintly from its stack. He waved his arms, screamed until his throat was raw, but the ship kept its steady pace, blind as a speck of wreckage adrift in the endless sea. Marco refused to let it pass. He tore strips from the sail canvas and lifted them like flags, thrusting them into the air. His arms trembled, his vision swam, but he would not stop. "Here!" he rasped, though the wind carried the word away. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, still shaking the cloth, still refusing surrender. For hours, minutes, he could not tell, the ship loomed closer. At last, a flash of light, the glint of binoculars. Shouts rose faintly across the water. Figures gathered on the deck, pointing. A whistle blew. Marco laughed, a broken, wheezing laugh that turned into sobs. He raised his arms once more before collapsing face first onto the raft. The last thing he remembered was the thunder of engines growing louder, closer, filling the silence of the sea. When he woke again, rough hands were pulling him up. Spanish voices surrounded him, urgent and alive. A blanket was thrown over his shoulders, and a tin cup pressed to his lips. Water, sweet, blessed water, ran down his throat. Marco clutched it as though it were a chalice. He was saved. Back on the deck, Marco shivered under the blanket, his body trembling from cold, exhaustion, and relief. The sailors fussed over him, offering food and water, speaking rapidly in Spanish. He could barely understand, but gestures and smiles were enough. The warmth of human care was dizzying after so many days alone on the endless, indifferent sea. He pressed his hand to his chest and felt the waterproof pouch there, Lucia's note, smudged and damp, yet intact. A trembling laugh escaped him. She'll never have to wait for me," he whispered. The sailors smiled knowingly, though none could know what the paper meant to him. The tether had been through the storm, the waves, and his despair. The freighter made its slow way back toward land. For Marco, the journey was both agony and grace. He could feel the taste of life returning. Each sip of water, each bite of hard bread, each soft blanket as miraculous as the apparition he had seen. He never spoke of it to the sailors, not yet. But in his heart, the memory burned bright, a light in the shadow of survival. When the ship docked in a small port, his wife was there before he could even step off. She ran to him, arms wide, tears streaming, and he fell into her embrace, shaking, gasping, clinging as if he might be swept away again. Lucia jumped onto his back, wrapping her small arms around his neck, pressing her forehead to his. He laughed and cried all at once, tasting salt and relief and joy he had thought lost forever. That night, He carried Lucia's note in his hand to the church near the harbor. The doors creaked as he pushed them open. The candles flickered in the quiet sanctuary. Kneeling before the statue of the Virgin Mary, he pressed the note to the altar and whispered a single word, "Thank you." Tears rolled down his cheeks. He did not pray for miracles anymore. He had seen one, and it had carried him through the abyss. From that day forward, whenever Marco walked along the shoreline or heard the waves crashing against the pier, he did not see an endless, cruel expanse of water. He saw the place where he had been lost, and where he had been found. He had returned not only to his family, but to life itself, to love, to faith renewed in a way that no hardship could erase. He never forgot the warmth of the apparition, the gentle voice that had whispered in the marrow of his bones. In the silence of the sea, he had discovered that hope could survive even the darkest, loneliest nights. And as he held his daughter's hand, he knew, without question, that some promises, like miracles, were kept,